And good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to another live Xanadu Gallery Art Business Academy online critique group session. Today is Wednesday, August 25th, 2021. Pleasure as always to have you all back here in the session. And of course, last week we had an Ask Me Anything session, but it's good to get back to reviewing some artwork. And we're going to jump right into it. I'd like to welcome our featured artist, who is coming to us from the opposite end of the country from me, Kari Feuer. If I can get you to go ahead and unmute, and we'll welcome you to the session.
Hello.
Hi, Kari. And tell us a little bit about where you're coming to us from, where your studio is located.
Okay, I'm on the coast in North Carolina, and my studio's in my house at this point. We just moved down here from New York State a few years ago, about 3 years ago. And so I kind of made a little bit smaller studio than I was used to. I used to have a public studio where people could actually come and buy art. Now, not so much.
Yeah. And so we're gonna there are a couple of things there that I'm going to want to talk to you about related to this move, but let's maybe go back a little bit before that and talk to us about how you came to be interested in art and how your career has developed over the years.
Well, I was always one of those kids, and I'm sure that we all are, whose parents are saying, "Oh, you draw so well," blah, blah, just from like age 5. So I had a lot of other interests, and so I didn't really focus on art very much. A little bit in high school, and then I thought about majoring in college, and I didn't like the whole art fashion that was going on then, which was op art and pop art. So I majored in theater as a designer. So I was a costume designer for a while in the theater. Then I was a clothing designer in New York City for some years. And then we moved a little bit north of the city, and I was an interior designer. I started my own business, and I gave that up about 14 years ago, thinking, first of all, I was feeling very burned out. I said, I can't do this like for the rest of my life. I said, what could I do for the rest of my life? So art was it. And I was really starting almost from ground zero. I had, a background in color and design and so forth, but I had very few art courses under my belt at that point.
Yeah, and so how did you kind of what was the process for getting back into art and or starting to paint? How
workshops? Did you? Yeah, workshops were great. We lived very near Woodstock, New York, and that's just a hotbed of artists and a lot of professionals and people who have been in the city working, and I had friends in the city who were professional artists. So I just took whatever workshop appealed to me, got what I could out of it, and just kept taking them and kind of developed my own thing. Mentoring is important too. Finding somebody to really work with, who's giving you critiques and so on is really a good thing.
Great. So let's jump in and start looking at your work. And I think we can kind of tie what we're about to see kind of back into what you've been talking about. And let's start having you talk just a little bit about this subject matter, where your interest is coming from and how that has developed.
Okay, so I never was interested in painting anything except landscapes. Never painted people, never painted flowers. It's always landscapes because I was just a really outdoorsy kind of person. I loved gardening and hiking and being outdoors in general. So that was my subject. And over the years, I could see that I wasn't a very patient painter. So to sit and do like all the little leaves on the tree and stuff, it just like wasn't me. So I really aspired to have a semi-abstract style where I could sort of just build in excitement and color and not focus very much on the stuff in the painting. And so that's where these are going.
And landscape, obviously, we're seeing a lot of emphasis on the sky. These, to me, have a little bit of a feel of a coastal landscape or marshes and that kind of thing. And so has that been a development that has come along as you've moved to a coastal area?
Absolutely. The skies here are amazing. And I love the whole, I just am a coast person. I grew up in Seattle on the coast and just was never real happy living inland in New York. So I would grab the family every summer and go out to Cape Cod. So that was our thing for many years. And so I've been doing a lot of sort of coastal art for a long time. But I found when we moved down here that suddenly there weren't mountains and trees in the way of everything. And we just had these beautiful big vistas. And so I've kind of got to be known for my skies, I think.
Yes, and what is your process? Are you doing painting on location, or is most of your work studio work?
I used to paint on location. I used to work outdoors a lot. And I think everybody who paints landscape should go through that process. You just need to, be able to observe the light and so forth outdoors. But then, in recent years, I've thought, well, let me just apply more imagination to this. I often use a reference photograph, but not always. Sometimes it's just out of my head. Sometimes it's just color work almost, like this was. I don't think I used any kind of reference material on this. It was really just developing a palette, and the material is kind of interesting. It was oil and cold wax as a medium, so it kind of just laid down on the canvas a little bit differently.
So then let's take a quick look at a few images that you submitted of presentation, and you can tell us, is what we're seeing here fairly typical of how you'd present your work, framing, and
I always
what's
use a float frame because I think, landscapes can feel sort of like old fashioned or trite or something sometimes if they have a fancy frame on them. So I just like to keep it more contemporary looking. And I switched from black to white when we moved down here because it just seemed to go with everybody's decor a little bit better.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you've got a background in interior design. How much of that experience plays into your thought process in terms of presentation and scale of the work and kind of the impact that you're striving for with the work?
I never really thought about it very much, except that I'm sort of struggling with how decorative do I want to be and how much do I want to just like work on more interesting painting, and sometimes I see artists who are real artists and just have this really interesting painting technique, but I know that people wouldn't buy their paintings for their living room. So that's kind of always a spectrum and a struggle, and like, how far are you going to push that?
Yeah, and so, okay, let's, we've had a chance to look at the work and some of the presentation. I want to get some reactions from those of you who are here in the panel, but I want to start with a few reactions that were submitted ahead of time via review. And Diane from New Jersey, Little Egg Harbor in New Jersey says, peaceful and soothing, easy to live with. The world could use a respite. Your work provides a much needed feeling of calmness. Does that resonate, Kari? Is that something that you're striving for in the work?
Not necessarily, but it's how I feel it when I'm painting it. I stand back from the scene a lot. I mean, I like these really, really long views. Maybe it's just because being in a car, I would kind of discover these things, and snap a picture, from a long ways away and use that reference. But I'm not kind of in the scene as much as sort of seeing it from a long ways away, usually incorporating a lot of sky, which is calming. And this is something that I hear a lot, that it's, the work kind of gives a feeling of serenity.
Yes, and we're going to see more of that. Barbara Lipkin from Naperville, Illinois says, I love the open skies. Obviously, we're going to hear lots of echoes about the skies. The paintings are beautiful. Elizabeth Fontaine-Barr from Florida says, very beautiful landscapes. Here's that word again, calming, with a plein air feel to them. And then she says, the first one, Waterway, feels a bit more abstract in its style, but not so different as to be done by another artist. All of these would hang well in a gallery as a body of work. Okay, we're going to explore this little point that Elizabeth has brought up, because I got some more reactions kind of along this same line. Bill, who's in Italy, says, I really like your landscapes. The colors are wonderful. I'm not sure about the abstract-like painting, Fire in the Wind in presentation image 1. It does not fit with the other images. abstraction and landscape from painting to painting, some more, some less, some feel like it fits, some not so much. So this I want to explore a little bit. And we saw that. Let me just run back to the image that was being referenced here.
Right.
We see two pieces, and the piece on the left, which I'm assuming Bill must have zoomed way in to see the card on the wall to know the title of it.
Oh yeah.
But it's clearly it is an abstracted piece, and you know, as we look at the other pieces, we would say, okay, whoa, that is very different, obviously, in terms of subject matter and stylistic approach.
And I realized as we were starting to get together for this, that the images that I had sent you were all landscapes. And this is part of my problem, is that I really like to take, you know, time off from the landscapes and paint abstracts, then go back to a landscape, then try to get something in the middle. So there is sort of a range, and Fire in the Wind is kind of typical of my abstracts, but I hadn't given you any of those. So I didn't even know if we really, I forgot I gave you this.
Yes. Well, and I wanted to kind of allude to that a little bit. Those of you in the session who are accustomed to seeing a website link will notice that I didn't include one, even though Kari gave it to me, because I wanted to, I'm going to show you the website, but I wanted to keep the focus kind of on the landscapes that we were seeing here and talk about that consistency, and then come over and talk about some abstract work that we're going to see on the website. So talk about this. You mentioned you feel like it's a challenge. Talk about this push and pull between the abstracts and the landscape work that you're doing, and how much of each are you doing? Have you shown both? And what's kind of your thought process around?
Well, this particular slide is from a show that I put up last year that then nobody ever got to go into because they locked the door. But it was a solo show, and I thought it would be interesting to put up a show where I paired traditional landscapes with my abstract landscapes. And for me, this is a landscape as just as much as the other one. So I always have in my head when I'm painting it, an abstract, landforms, atmosphere, you know, same kind of color palette a lot. So for me, they're still landscapes. So they should sort of relate, and it's, you know, it's hard to say, like in the show, you know, each pair related somewhat better and somewhat worse, you know, as we went along. But normally I don't set up a show that way. And I do find that they tend to be separated into completely different bodies of work by most people. So the people who buy my paintings are buying landscapes, and the people who are giving me putting something in a museum show or in a book or something like that, those are always the abstracts.
Interesting. Yes. Yeah. So let's, I think I have a couple of more comment. Oh, no, actually that was the comment and started the conversation. I thought this would be a good time, and we have this conversation every several months in the critique group where we talk about consistency. Okay, what is it that would constitute a cohesive, consistent body of work? What does it take to tie the work together and allow it to show together and to create a feeling of cohesion among a body of work? And I feel like it's good every once in a while to go over the criteria that I feel are very important. And then I want to come back, Kari, and look at your work and see how we can kind of make that leap. And so when I'm looking at consistency, and kind of analyzing an artist's work to see how well all of it fits together, I'm looking at the subject matter. And so already in this case, the 5 images that you submitted were all landscapes. They all had a similar subject. The thematic elements, I feel like, again, all tied together, the skies and kind of the calming, peaceful, serene nature of the work. Now, the style is where we could maybe start to say, okay, even among those 5 pieces that you submitted, we could see some variety of style. We're going to look at them again in just a minute and kind of revisit that. But that's where we start to see some divergence among the small sample set that we were seeing there. Palette, you just mentioned, even between the more representational landscapes and the more abstracted works, that you are still striving to keep a cohesive, harmonious palette going. We could see that. Medium, you're working in several different media, so that there's some variety. And then presentation. Now, this is interesting because if we were to look at that, the photo of the landscape and the abstract piece together, I think it is really interesting to see how having them framed in the same frame does already start to create a kind of fingerprint across the work that helps me know,
Yeah.
okay, there is something going on here that ties them together, even though there's some real variety, in terms of the style and the subject matter. So with that said, I now want to work our way back through these images, and I would like to invite those of you who are in the panel to hop into this conversation. And there are no right or wrong answers, but just give me your impressions. If you're looking at Kari's work and kind of thinking about how it fits together, what are you seeing in terms of things that help tie it together, or things that you feel might pull those images apart and cause some dissonance between the various pieces? And I'll take volunteers if you want to throw a hand up in front of the camera or click on the hand icon. I'll pull you in. And as usual, if I don't get enough volunteers, I will do it Army style and volunteer you. Let me start with Kate, if I could get you in, and then I'll go to Patricia. What are you seeing here, Kate?
I think the biggest difference between the abstract and the landscapes, probably one of the biggest things is the color palette is very, is pretty different in a lot of ways. I'm seeing some more brilliant hues that are like color for themselves. This is the one that you're showing, the roaming light, is abstract, but in a lot of ways it's not.
Yeah, we've got a horizon line and clouds, right? But some very abstracted elements.
Yeah. So I would have to say that for me, the color was one of the biggest differences in terms of consistency.
Okay. Other comments? Patricia, I think I saw you might have a comment. Let me see if I can get you unmuted there, and then I'll go to Judy, I think.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Well, I really like her work, but I'm thinking they're more like skyscapes than they are landscapes. So biggest part of the painting is the sky. And yeah. I love it. I love all those clouds forming, and
yeah, and I think that I also, we've kind of already alluded to this, that really that sky is the focal point. And if you kind of think about our environment and the visual experience we have as we're going through the world, isn't the sky kind of the most abstract element that we encounter, where the clouds don't have harsh edges, and the colors can change dramatically, and the shapes are very fluid. And so again, as I look at the work, that abstraction is there across all the pieces, whether they're representational of the landscape or not, or more representational or less representational.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the abstract that you showed up close with the landscape, they had the same colors in them. So to me, they read together, that they wouldn't interfere if they were hanging in your room side by side.
Yeah. Yes. As Kari, you alluded to, these were works that spoke to one another.
Right.
Let's see. Judy, did you have a comment? Maybe not. Cheryl, let me see if I can get you in. Should be asking to unmute.
Got it.
Gotcha.
Hi, Jason.
Good morning.
Good morning. First time I've talked on your show. If I went to a gallery and saw this variety of paintings, beautiful paintings, I would go, she just hit the right note of giving enough variety. It could be very easy to walk away and think, oh, I've seen one, I've seen them all, kind of a feeling. So to me, there needs to be a very fine balance between, yeah, this is a body of work. Yeah, I can tell that it's all from one artist. However, there needs to be enough variation. And if I come across one very abstract painting with some red in it and nothing else has a little red, every darn time it seems like someone at that show goes, bingo, here's a painting with red. It's the first one out the door. And a lot of times it's a much younger couple. So my vote is she's just fine. And I think she's hit a very good balance. So that's my input. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yes, and I think that is, it is interesting to kind of think about the experience that a viewer at an art show or seeing the work in a gallery, how is the work going to strike them? Are they going to be able to look at all the work and say, yeah, I can see some variety here, but I can also tell that this was done by one artist. Ultimately, that's what I'm aiming for.
Yeah.
Where you wouldn't want to feel like there was one or two pieces in there that they're going along and they're like, whoa, what is this? What's going on here? And I don't think among these 5 pieces that we've sampled, there is some real variety in terms of style. We can see, this is a good example. If I look at this piece and then the next piece, I can even feel like there's some different brushwork going on, some different textures. But again, we also need to kind of think about the context where we would be seeing it. And if I just had these 2 pieces on display, that might be a little bit hard because they do have some different elements. But if I'm seeing them in the context of the 5 different pieces and I'm seeing some push and pull and some variety in terms of style, and especially though, if I could have the same frame on all of those pieces as a gallery owner, I think I could pretty successfully figure out how to hang these together and show that work together and have it feel like one body of work. Anyone else want to hop in with a comment or a question about consistency or how you've struggled with consistency? Elizabeth, I think I see you, and then I'll go to Ellen.
Hi. This one, Waterway, was the one that I found really interesting because I did notice a difference in the style. Like the water itself is more of a color block approach. The brushstroke is really flat, and the other ones, but the sky's not. And the other ones, the water wasn't treated that way, and so the brushstrokes are very similar in the other paintings. Tiny little bit of color block there at the horizon, but I really liked the Waterway. I like the difference approach on that because that's a way for me as an artist, that would be a way for me to give variety, but not really step out of the box too far. And I like the way that fit in with everything else. And I have to admit, I didn't even pay attention to the abstract piece. I just kind of looked at that and went, where'd that come from? And then didn't even give it a thought. It's like, I wasn't even expecting it. And so then I forgot to even comment on it because it was something that I just didn't even pay attention to, which is interesting.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. Ellen, let me get you in, and then Kari, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to what we've been talking about. Morning, Ellen.
Good morning. I love her work. I love her landscapes. And this one particularly that you have up, and some of the other ones I saw on her website, to me, they have a feel like Monet's work. They're very impressionistic. And I've always been drawn to that kind of work because to me, it kind of has a soft, dreamy feel to it. And it kind of engages your imagination. And it's kind of interesting because I don't do impressionistic stuff at all. My stuff's very, very photorealistic. But I really like the impressionistic. I haven't learned how to do that. I see a picture and I've got to reproduce it exactly the way I see it. And I really admire.
And that's what keeps life interesting, right, Ellen?
Yeah.
Is it kind of having the variety of style and approaches to the work. I might also comment that yes, it is very loose and impressionistic and towards abstract. And I also note that there is a lot of atmosphere in these pieces that, it's not just the landscape and the sky, but it's the air between me and the subject matter. There's some of them have kind of a little bit of a mist almost in them, or even just not mist, but even you can almost feel a little bit of the humidity that might be there and kind of see that between you and the subject.
Especially in
So,
North Carolina.
yeah, that's right. I've spent my wife and I love North Carolina. We spent quite a
Really?
bit of time in Charlotte and Asheville, and we've been over to the coast and South Carolina as well. And it is just such a different, unique landscape and atmosphere that you get there. Boy, and not hard to understand how you might end up there, Kari. Now, respond, Kari, a little bit to what we've been talking about with your work and kind of your thought processes. And I'd be interested to know, especially, as you're kind of coming to create a new piece and kind of thinking about the subject matter, what's your thought process for, I mean, are you consciously saying, okay, this piece is going to be more abstract or is going to be a pure abstract? How much planning is going into your future pieces?
It varies. My starting point is just, kind of like having a horizon, and that's going to put it into the landscape category and out of the abstract category. So my abstracts, usually differ, mainly in that way. They don't have a horizon line. So sometimes it's just, I've got some paint on my palette and I'm liking these colors that go together and I just start laying them down. You can tell that this was painted with a palette knife, and a lot of the other work was done with a palette knife. But now I'm complicating my life by having finally bought myself some nice brushes. I never wanted to spend the money on them before, but yeah. I won a contest last summer and they gave me a lot of money. So I said, okay, I can put a couple $100 into brushes.
Yeah. And so, okay. And this is another important point. You've mentioned it that, relatively speaking, we have some artists here who have been painting or sculpting for decades. I was about to say centuries because I'm sure it feels like that to some of you, but for a good long time. And you're a little bit newer to this relative to that. And so you're still, well, maybe I should ask, do you still feel like your style is developing and that you're in an exploratory phase?
Well, I feel experimental sometimes, and it's just, I experiment for the fun of it. And that's also why I go and paint, something that's much more abstract. It's just to take a vacation, and all of these, with the exception of that one that's hanging in the pear, I consider my representational landscapes. Some of them are more abstract, some of them are less abstract, but for me, these are all representational paintings. And I sort of like what Ellen was saying about Impressionism, because I sometimes think of this, my style is abstract Impressionism, which isn't really a thing.
It is if you say it is, Kari. Yeah, okay, so let's hop over to your website. Let me pull it up here so we can take a look at it. And I think this then does kind of raise the question, if you were to think about, well, I'm going to go participate in a show, or I'm going to be submitting my work in a portfolio to galleries. Mm-hmm. When we look at the website, I think we do then have to start saying, okay, selection, how am I going to choose among these bodies of work? And so let me just pull the website up, and I am going to post the link to the website so you can all go back. But I wanted to keep the focus on the landscapes primarily. So we've got in your portfolio of works on your site, we've got the coastal scenes, which kind of fit with the 5 that we were seeing. And then we've got a whole other category of abstracts. And so as I open that up, I can see a body of work here that is cohesive and consistent within itself. Uh-huh. But boy, I really do see 2 fairly distinctive bodies that likely, as you mentioned, are going to have an appeal to a different audience. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that clients who are buying pieces are buying a lot of the landscapes, but that the museum shows and the books are going for the abstracted work.
Right.
And so this is really kind of an interesting dichotomy that's created by having these distinctive styles. And I would suggest that you have done well on the website of separating them out, it would be a little confusing to see all of the work together.
Yeah.
I also think that if you were to kind of think about expanding your exposure and reaching out and submitting portfolios to galleries and looking for representation, that you would be well served to have two separate portfolios or to really focus in on one or the other bodies
Yeah.
of those works. The challenge is that, well, as a gallery owner, and this could even be a little bit of a concern, even if you did have them separated out. If I were to go to your website, my natural question is going to be, okay, is Kari committed to the landscapes that I'm interested in? Or, conversely, if I was interested in the abstracts, is that where she's going? Or is she going to be doing more of the other work? And that little confusion that can come up can be a real challenge for galleries. It can be a challenge for collectors. A collector who came to your website might see it as a bit of confusion. And so typically I'm trying to keep my clients' focus on, if an artist has several bodies of work, I want to keep their focus on the body of work that we're focused on showing and selling.
Yeah.
Has this been a challenge, Kari? And kind of what are your what's your thought process in that regard?
Well, that's one of the questions that I have for you, because one thing that has happened is in the past I've been invited into galleries who want to show my abstract work, and then they find out that the representational work sells better, so then we start flipping it over. So it's really confusing.
Yeah. And it certainly, and I've said this before here, that, when you've got several or two fairly distinctive bodies of work, in some ways, you might think of it as, I wouldn't want to say multiple personality kind of situation, but in some ways there are some elements of that where you've got some push and pull, and, the work is going to appeal to different audiences. And so we just kind of want to be a little bit careful about how we share and show the work.
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, if I were putting together a portfolio, I could pretty easily, among the coastal scenes, for example, even here we've got a little bit of variety, but again, with a similar presentation, I could fairly easily create a portfolio of work. And if you had 20, 25 pieces and you kind of think about the order that you're showing that work, or maybe you start with, you could go either way, start with the more abstracted pieces and then work your way slowly towards more representational so that there is a kind of natural narrative across the work. You can bring your audience along with you and help them see what is interesting to you in those various styles. But then you kind of have to also think about the limits. What is the most abstracted work that I could fit into this portfolio and still have it make sense, and have it make a fit? And when I'm putting together a portfolio or putting together a show of work, I would want to err on the side of caution. If I feel iffy about something, about a particular piece and how it fits with the other work, I would tend to think about kind of editing it out of the collection and trying to have all the pieces fit together as much as they could.
Yeah.
Now, we spent most of our time already talking about kind of the cohesion and consistency, but I do want to talk also about your pricing. And how you're valuing the work. Let me hop over. And I've got another comment from Elizabeth actually about pricing, and I want your feedback on this. She says, I have curiosity about the sizes and pricing. I'm assuming you stretch your own canvases, and that's why a few are not standard sizes. That's a question mark. Also, I couldn't figure out your price point. Your pricing is not consistent, so I'm wondering how you arrive at those values. Talk about that, Kari. How are you, first, are you creating your own canvases and custom sizes?
Yeah.
And then how are you coming up with the pricing and value?
Yeah. So a painting like this, that's pretty large, I don't want to have to buy a frame for it because it's expensive to frame. So I do it on heavy stretchers, stretch my own linen, and, along with those float frames, there'll be a lot of paintings just on stretchers. But that's, the kind of the two ways I go. So it's fairly consistent. So going back several years, back to New York State, I worked with one of the really good galleries in our county, which was just a little north of the city, who we kind of arrived at a number for a 24 by 30 canvas, very stock size. And he sold them at that number. That was about, let's see, at that time, I think that was $2,000. And so I know that it was sellable then and there, at that price. That's literally 10 years ago, I think, maybe a little bit less, maybe 7 or 8 years ago. And I've been keeping the same prices ever since then. It was before the recession. So, maybe, yeah.
A little even more maybe, yeah.
Yeah. And, the recession put a dent in everything and say, I can't raise prices. And that went on for years and years where I didn't raise any prices. And I'm really basically still working with that price list pretty much. I may have come up 10% or something like that. But then there's another wrinkle. So everything on my website is full retail. And so in the event that I work with a gallery that, takes a 50% commission, it's built into that. But I'm working with people down here who take a 30% commission. So in my little ledger, for each painting, I have 2 prices. I have 3 prices: my net price, my 100% markup price, and my 30% commission price. So depending on my venue, it might be that price. And this one would be like a $450 painting, in that gallery.
Yeah. So
I'm really trying to be consistent, but it's hard.
Yeah. And so, if you look at your price list, is there a kind of correlation between the size of the
Sizes.
work and the
Yeah.
retail price? Even,
Yeah.
And do you kind of have a sense of what your per square inch is, or does it vary based on
No,
the
because
size?
I don't do it that way, because I find a little painting takes almost as much work as a painting
Yeah.
that's 2-3 times the size, when you start to work out your palette and your composition and everything. So the price sort of goes up per square inch as they get smaller.
As they get smaller. Yeah, that would be fairly typical.
Yeah.
Let me first comment on the pricing consistency question. This is a challenge, and what you're describing, okay, I've got some galleries that are at the 50% in full retail and some that are 30%, and so then a little bit lower price point. I would suggest that could lead to some challenges down the road and some potential conflict with your buyers and your galleries. As we know, your clientele is much more, they have a lot more ability to have an overview of your art and access it and see it in various places. And if you've got a 20% difference in price points, depending on the venue, it is inevitable that eventually you're going to start getting questions on that, either from clientele
Here's
or
the
from
deal.
galleries.
I did not do that in New York, because I really believe you have to have total consistency across the board. But here, there were a couple things entering into that. One is I'm not showing in any galleries that are, full markup. I just have not been able to find gallery representation down here yet. The other thing is that, what was the other thing? I forgot.
Well, yeah, and so that is a fair assessment then. What I would say is then that we're striving for transparency and consistency in pricing,
Yeah.
and if the venues that you're showing in are consistent at present, then it's not an issue right now. And only when you had an opportunity to show with galleries at the higher price point, then you're going to have to answer that question and kind of
I agree.
smooth things out a little bit.
Yeah.
Boy, I mean, there's a lot that we could talk about with pricing, and we don't have a lot of time to do it. But I'll just echo what I've said before. We do want to strive for that consistency and for developing a formulaic approach. And it sounds like you have done that. You've got a price sheet that you're working from that would allow you to have that consistency. Let me go ahead. We've got just a couple of minutes left, but I'd love to get any comments or questions that you have. Bill, I think I see a hand up from you. If you want to hop in here, please go ahead and unmute and fire away. And we can talk about anything you want to for the last few minutes.
Well, first, I must agree with most of the other people. I really like your work, and I find it very interesting. I like looking at it. The person I actually, when I looked at work that it reminded me of was Turner, not Monet.
I get that a
Because
lot.
of-
Yeah.
because of the skies. And I like that a lot. The third thing is that you talk about that, for example, waterways, that it's not framed. Are you painted the sides or have you put a solid color on the sides? How have you handled the sides of the canvas?
Great question.
Yeah, and it's an interesting question because I find it's kind of different depending on where you are. So I teach art a lot here, and my students like want to do that wraparound paint thing a lot, on the heavy structures, where they're continuing their picture around, and I'm like, this is a North Carolina thing. If you go to any Chelsea gallery in New York City, you will not see people painting the margins of their painting. I think it's a stretch to even put black gesso on the edges, which I do on, some paintings, depending on the overall values of the painting itself. This one has white edges. So, and I took this to a show, actually, a real old line art association show that's very important in Wilmington, North Carolina. And it had some drips on the side and they wouldn't take it. I had to run back to my studio, put white gesso on it and blow on it. I got it back that day and get it into the show. So, it's really weird, when you go from place to place. All I could say is I guess you got to do what your locality wants you to do, but I am not painting the edges with a picture. They are either black or white.
Okay.
Yeah, and boy, we've had a conversation on this as well. I would suggest that you're right. There are some regional preferences, I would call them, and I would think of them that way. Not necessarily hard policies that you have to adhere to, but just maybe some preferences depending on the aesthetics of the area. But what I end up finding for, at least with the artists that I'm working with, is that eventually you want to move towards more and more consistency in that regard as well. And that ultimately, even though there may be preferences, as the artist, you get to make the ultimate decision and your audience will follow. In other words, what I'm saying is, Kari, if you decided, you know what, I personally prefer black gesso on my edges, and I'm going to do that with all of my work from now on. That consistency that would come from that, or it might be white gesso, or it might even be I want to extend the painting around the side, that consistency that would come ultimately would just be accepted. Your clientele would say, that's how she does it. I love her work. That's her decision. That's how she does it. That's how I'm going to buy it.
And the consistency
and
is
it
more
just
important than
simplifies the
actual thing.
process of production and creation to not have to, independently decide that for each piece of work that you're creating, which direction am I going to go? And so I would suggest that, you work towards that as well.
On the 3/4 inch canvases, they're always black because the float frames have that black interior and you need that,
There you
that
go.
black. So that's always
Yeah.
the case on those.
Well, Kari, we've done it. We've gone over our allotted time for the session. I really want to thank you for sharing your work. Thanks to everyone for the comments that you've submitted and the conversation that we've had that we have had with the work today. Kari, thank you so much.
Thank you and everybody for your criticism, your comments. It's really given me some insight. It's just been great.
Awesome. We'll look forward to keeping track of your work. And as I mentioned, I am going to share the website link. I'd encourage you all to hop on there and spend a little bit more time looking at the work. We're going to be doing something a little bit different next week. I'm not going to give any spoilers here, but our featured artist next week is a little bit different. That's all I'm going to say. So be sure and watch for our email notification next week, and we'll look forward to having you join us in the next session. Take care, everyone. Have a great week. We'll see you next